You're listening to Diggin' In, brought to you by Concept AgriTek. Visit us on the web at conceptagritech.com.
All right, well, thanks everyone for joining us back here for the third and final episode of our Concept AgriTek Soil Science series. Today we're talking with Concept AgriTek President Daniel Hensley. Daniel, thanks for joining us here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, excited to talk about how all of these things fit into what Concept AgriTek is doing and providing to the agriculture industry, really bringing things full circle and tying things back to the proven product lineup that you folks offer there at Concept AgriTek. So to get us started, let's start at the beginning here of these conversations. In our initial conversation with Dr. White, he talks about the rhizophagy cycle. And you mentioned something really interesting, before we started recording here today, talking about how we already knew a lot of these things. So talk a little bit about that and what Concept AgriTek does on the research side of things.
Yeah, we were taking a look at a lot of different things. What we were very interested in what was going on in the soil. So that's, we're really focused on the soil, and we think, it's kind of where we start our fertility programs, right? And so, we kind of felt like we were missing a piece of the puzzle, if you will, when we were trying to put all this together. And, we started to take a look at biology in the soil. So, we started this about 9 years ago now. So, when we started taking a look at that, we've spent a tremendous amount of time trying to learn things. And when you got a bunch of guys from Arkansas trying to figure something like that out, we sometimes we need some help. So we've been reaching out to a lot of people, and as I got to listen to Dr. White as he was going through the different cycles and how the plants utilize bacteria, those things we've been observing. We knew that some of this stuff was going on, and we kept he focused a lot on root hairs, and he talked about how those plants take in the bacteria. It excretes the bacteria once it's kind of done with it. The living ones go back into the soil and basically start the cycle again. That's why it's a cycle, right? But without that, we get no root hairs, which is very interesting because over the last 9 years, every time we've added our bunch of bugs, our consortium of bacteria and fungi, things of that nature, when we've added that into the soil, we've been seeing that. He even went as far as talking about root exudates, right, and sugars and things that the plant excretes. And it's such an interesting thing because we would dig those plants up and we would see all these little fine root hairs, and we're thinking, man, this is really cool. You'd go to the check or the untreated, you didn't see it. So we knew things were going on. And then you go back and look where those really fine root hairs were, and you go, oh, wait. They're wet. The soil is sticking to that. There's something going on here. You go to the untreated, nothing. So these things we've been seeing, and then all of that is relating to healthier plants, higher yields, all of these things. So we've been seeing it for a long time. It's just such a fun thing to hear. Someone else that's spent all this time working on that, and they can help you validate the things that you've been seeing.
Oh, definitely. And, it's such an aha moment to hear him talk about root hairs. In soil science, undergrad, even graduate programs, you learn that root hairs are for water and nutrient uptake. We haven't learned in the past that they're actually producing exudates through those root hairs as well. And they're acting as kind of a coaxing mechanism to produce what they need. And so that definitely an aha moment listening to him talk a little bit about that. A little bit more on the rhizophagy cycle. You mentioned bunch of bugs. Talk about bunch of bugs and how that's applied, when in the season, and how do you talk about your testing around that, Daniel, and how you observed those fine root hairs. One of the interesting conversations we had initially was we were talking about where your research was at and what you were seeing from different locations. And you made a really interesting comment that I've remembered. You said it didn't really matter that much where we were testing at. We were seeing the same results. And so talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, when we think about, kind of hindsight's 2020, right? So now we're
Right.
where we are today, and we're like, man, we could have got here a lot quicker if we would have known some of these things, 6 or 7 years ago. But you're right. We were seeing a lot of I tell people all the time we've paid a lot of tuition going through this. We've really
Mhm.
messed a lot of stuff up, and we've got a little bit of stuff right. So, one of the things that we noticed, very early on, we were seeing good results, but not nearly as consistent results. And so we're thinking, man, what's going on here? Well, to make a long story a little shorter, we had all aerobic bacteria in there. Now we have quite the consortium of different things, from aerobic, anaerobics. We've mixed fungi in there. We've done a much better job of having a bigger team, if you will.
Mhm.
And so when we increased our team and we made that much better, then our results started becoming much more consistent. Now we're going from flooded rice fields in Arkansas to dry land corn in South Dakota. And so now we're starting to see the same results across a much broader spectrum of farming practices. It's all because we expanded that team of biology, if you will.
Hmm. And that's such a cool concept too that he touches on as well. He's doing work in corn, in some landrace corn, in conventional corn, in Bermuda grass. So this works across the gamut. And when
Yeah.
you think about the fundamentals of how all of this comes together, whether you're talking about the human gut microbiome, a cow's rumen, or a soil microbiome, you've got to have that diversity to have any kind of meaningful impact.
Yeah, that's exactly right. He's working with many different cropping systems and farming practices. And we're seeing the same thing. It's very interesting. We're going from produce and what might be very high input crops, all the way to pasture ground that's a little bit lower input crop. And it doesn't matter anywhere in between. When we start to think about soil health is kind of soil health, right?
Right.
You need that biology in there. You need those things happening, and if you don't have that biological activity going on in the soil, now all of a sudden, all of our fertilizers that we're putting in, all of our other inputs become much less efficient.
Hmm.
So the more biology, the happier we can make that soil, then the more efficient everything else that we apply is going to be. So it's very important that we get there to that
Oh,
point.
there's never been a more important time, when we talk about runoff and, point source pollution and all of these things that we're reading in the
Mhm.
paper, and then we see it on our bottom line at the end of the year on our farm sheets. It makes a big difference. So he talked a lot about nitrogen fixation. I know your team has some
Mhm.
great products that aid in that nitrogen fixation as well. Talk a little bit about that, Daniel.
Yeah, it's a buzz right now, right? Everybody's wanting to save money on fertilizer. Inputs are expensive; they're high. How am I more efficient? How do I save money? And as we just go through this process, it's part of that team I talked about earlier. There's multiple nitrogen fixing bacteria within our blend. It's something that we wanted from the very beginning. We've had this now for several years, and it does a very good job from soybean inoculation, which is nitrogen development, all the way to a corn crop. We're able to, back that nitrogen up a little bit. We're able to do some things there that, man, without those nitrogen fixing bacteria, we would never be able to lessen those nitrogen inputs.
Yeah, for sure. Excuse me. And he even took things one step farther, talking about these microbes. And he touched on the fact that your seed coat has to have a healthy microbiome. And I know your team also has some products that works with developing that microbiome on a seed coat and giving those products. Is it a biostimulant or is it a biofertilizer?
No, no. So it's neither. Well,
Neither.
it's
Okay.
so it's a biostimulant, It's called Seed Guard Bio.
Okay.
So it has a biostimulant that goes on the seed, but it also has a living, breathing bacteria package that's mixed in that. So it's a mix going on the seed. So we're not trying to harm the natural biome around that kernel or that seed in any way. We're trying to add to it. And by doing that, we're seeing much more even emergence. We're seeing healthier seedlings. When it comes up from it's helping with the seedling diseases, the very common seedling diseases from, Fusarium, Pythium, things of that nature. It's really helping that seedling to get off to a good start and do what it needs to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's really a cool 1-2 punch. He talked about the fact that, a lot of our processes today for treating seed make that seed coat null and devoid of any kind of microbiome. And so where you're coming in with a biofertilizer as well as a biostimulant, a biostimulant only works if you've actually got something there to stimulate, right? And so with that
right.
Consortium that you're actually adding, you're adding it and then you're promoting it. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's the whole idea.
Awesome.
That's exactly right.
So shifting gears here, totally different conversation. If you had a chance to listen to Rick and Liz when they joined us, different atmosphere, different folks, great to listen to. And the Haney test is one that your team there at Concept AgriTek has promoted for quite some time. Talk a little bit about that and why you stand behind that.
Yeah, that Haney test is one that, forever. When we first started trying our, we were going into this biological world, right? We were stepping off into that and running plots all over the place and looking at this. Well, we were seeing a lot of things happening, and there's a list a mile long of things we were seeing going on. But quite frankly, we couldn't validate any of those. We were going to our farmers and we're going, look at this. Look what's going on. They're going, okay, why is that? And we're going, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So when we started using the Haney test, that started to help us validate a lot of the things that we were seeing there. Like being able to use less nitrogen, being able to use less phosphorus. And I'll be real honest with you, Laura. There's parts of that Haney test that we're still learning on. I'm looking real forward to talking with those guys, and yeah, there's parts we're still learning on, and I'm excited about continuing our own education and how we can use that even further.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's such a neat process. Hearing from Rick, the reason that he started it, he would have given anything to go back to the farm, but we all know that that's a pretty capital intensive venture to break into. So the next best thing is, how do I help farmers do more with what they have? And this Haney test really does that. He says he didn't have a lot to unlearn when he went to grad school because the soil science education just wasn't there. And so where we've come in the last 5 years, the last 10 years, it seems to me like we've just really made leaps and bounds. And you guys are about a decade old now there at Concept AgriTek. Talk about getting started and kind of the evolution of all of these thought processes and becoming a thought leader in the space as well.
Yeah, so all of ours started with fertilizer side of things, specifically the liquid fertilizer part. We were trying to sell starter fertilizers and micronutrients, and we still have all of those products. But as we were getting into that and really starting to study soils, we just firmly believe that's if everything was right in the soil, everything else through the growing season works better. Okay, and you can pick whatever that is; it just works better. Okay. And so that's kind of where we started, and it didn't take us very long, maybe a year or two at best, to figure out, hey, there's something more. We run across just a guy at random, was a microbiologist, and he says, hey, have you guys tried any biology in the soil? Well, that was a term we never even thought of. Biology in the soil. What are you talking about? The soil's full of biology. And so, but we got to thinking about that. We're like, well, maybe there's something to it, and so we teamed up with some guys and said, hey, look, here's what we want. This is what we would like to have. And they weren't really in the ag industry, if you will. They were needing us as much as we were needing them. And so we kind of put our heads together and come up with our very first blend of bunch of bugs, right? And as we used that consortium for a few years, we just wanted more. We were seeing gaps in that, those inconsistencies I talked about earlier. We were seeing gaps in that. And so as we kept evolving with what we were learning and the things that we wanted, we wanted to bring the tilled acres, the farmed fields, back as close to original nature as we could get them. Because if you think about that fence row, right, that tree row, there's a lot of good stuff going on there, and there's not ever been the first thing done to it, right?
Right.
So as we studied that, we were testing soils, we were looking at all different kinds of things, and we quickly learned, hey, we have killed or eradicated a lot of good things out here in the field. And so that's how we kind of went down the road we're on today. And the products that we have today is we were able to figure out a bunch of things, from a drying process to a new consortium. And we added a lot of stuff. And to be real honest with you, Laura, we're still, we say all the time at Concept AgriTek, we're not going to get stagnant, and so I can tell you we're pleased with what we have, but can we keep making it better? I think so. And we're going to keep trying.
When you think about the fact that there are more microbes in a teaspoon of soil than there are people on the earth, you have a lot of work to do, right?
Yeah, it is a lot of work, and that's why it's got to be a team. We've got to have people like Rick and Liz. We got to have people like Dr. White. We've got to have those people in the industry that says, hey, here's what we're learning. And then for people like us, like Concept AgriTek, that gives us someone to lean on, someone to talk to, someone to help us. And that helps us to make better decisions on the consortium of biology that we may be using, whether that be bacteria, fungi, who knows what it is, beneficial nematodes, who knows, right? And so it takes us all to get to this point.
Oh, for sure. And, talking with Rick and Liz, it was such a cool conversation because they're really a dynamic team. Rick has the soil test and he can walk you through the soil test, but then Liz actually puts everything into practice. So she's on the farm with her soil regen company saying, this is what the test tells you. Well, that's great, but now what do I do? And so I think folks need that extra step there and that guidance. And you guys are great about doing that as well on your Concept AgriTek team. Everything is an individualized plan. Talk a little bit about that and how guys can get started.
Yeah, it's if anybody's interested in getting started down this biological road, or this more importantly, a healthy soil, balanced soil road, if you will. Here at Concept AgriTek, we're heavily agronomic based. We try to be able to have a reason behind everything that we do. So it starts with that soil. You've got to have a good quality, complete soil test. If that's a soil health test, one of the Haney tests, that's fine. But let's get a good quality soil test, something that's got the micronutrients, something that's got a correct base saturation, something that's got everything there that we need to see. Okay, and then we'll look at that. We ask a lot of questions. We go through and ask, well, how many passes do you make through the field? What's your yield environment? What's your yield goal? All of these things we ask because it's important that we know those things, so that when we help walk you through a fertility plan or a biological plan, even for your farm, we need to understand what's going on. That helps us make the best decision we can make. We say it all the time: if our farmers don't win, no one wins. And we mean that. It's important. So we have to get all that information. We have to have that really good relationship with the farmer to get that, so that we can maximize our efforts in helping them be efficient and then in turn maximize their yields.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing that we talked about, and I know that your team has seen as well, is the increased demand. So adoption is through the roof. Looking at the Haney soil health test, and whether that's because 2020 changed the way we're getting our information, and folks are just genuinely learning more. You have to think that the fertilizer prices have a lot to do with it as well. But whatever the drivers are, adoption is through the roof right now. How are you guys gearing up in 2023 to meet those demands?
Yeah, it's a great question, Laura. We, at our facility, there in Charleston, Missouri, we're undergoing a $3 million infrastructure project right now. Our demand is up. The demand in general is up for all of these things, and that's what we're doing. It's just a race. It's a race, and we're learning it's a marathon. It's not a 100-yard dash here. So that's what we're doing. We're trying to take it a step at a time. We've increased our dealer network. We've increased our district sales managers. We're increasing our infrastructures. All of these things are taking place to help us try to stay ahead of the demand, or at least try to run with it. Because man, right now it's pretty quick growth.
For sure. Good problem to have, right?
It is. We're very fortunate.
Very good. Well, Daniel, thanks for joining us here today. Is there anything that I haven't asked that you want to make sure that listeners take away from the conversation?
No, I think you've touched it all, Laura. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks again for your time. Certainly appreciate it, and appreciate the work that you guys are doing there at Concept AgriTek to help farmers make a difference.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening. Get more information at conceptagritech.com.